I always thought the days right before a wedding were supposed to feel magical, like the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to witness two people step into forever. And honestly, until that afternoon, mine did. The house smelled like jasmine candles and fresh linen. The playlist I made months ago hummed in the background, and I kept catching myself smiling at nothing, just imagining the moment I'd walk toward him, the man I loved, the man I was sure loved me back just as fiercely. My bridesmaids were due any minute for our final rehearsal run-through, and I was twirling in the living room, holding the hem of my practice dress the way the coordinator taught me. When I heard the sound of tires on gravel outside, not the casual rolling sound of someone arriving with joy. No, this was slower, heavier, deliberate. I peeked out the window. A long black car, polished so deeply it reflected the clouds, pulled into the driveway. My heartbeat faltered. His parents never came unannounced. In fact, they never came at all unless there was money, legacy, or reputation involved. The sight of that car on my driveway felt like a warning I didn't yet understand. The back door opened with a soft thud. His mother stepped out first. Perfectly pressed suit, pearls so white they practically glowed, and sunglasses even though the sun had already dipped low behind the trees. His father followed, stiff as a statue, adjusting his cufflinks like he was prepping for a board meeting, not a visit to his future daughter-in-law. Something in my stomach tightened. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They didn't even pretend. They just looked at me through the window with that expression rich people wear when they've already decided they're right. Cold, polished certainty. I went outside, smoothing my dress instinctively. "Hi, is everything okay?" I asked, forcing warmth into my voice. His mother removed her sunglasses with a slow, theatrical motion. "We need to speak privately, just like that. No greeting, no congratulations, no acknowledgement of the wedding only 3 days away. Just a command." I swallowed and nodded, stepping aside. They didn't wait for an invitation. They swept past me, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind like smoke. We sat in the living room, me on the couch, them on the armchairs opposite me like they were conducting an interview for a position I was about to be rejected from. His father crossed one leg over the other and rested his hand on his knee. "We'll get straight to the point." His mother reached into her bag and pulled out a thick ivory envelope. The kind that looked like it belonged in a law office, not in the lap of a woman 3 days away from her wedding. She didn't hand it to me gently. She let it drop onto my knees with a dull, heavy thud. "A formality," she said, her smile thin and sharp. "Something we require to protect the family legacy." I stared at the envelope. My fingers brushed the gold seal stamped across the flap. I didn't open it. I couldn't. My heart had begun to pound so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. "A prenup," his father clarified, as though I were slow. "Standard for families of our standing. Our standing. Their standing. Not mine." His mother leaned forward, elbows resting neatly on her knees. "We assumed you'd be cooperative, like I was a problem they were confidently expecting to solve." She watched me the way someone watches a child about to throw a tantrum, smirking, certain they already had the upper hand, certain I would fold, certain love would make me obedient. My throat went dry. "Why are you giving this to me now?" His mother didn't miss a beat, because earlier timing might have encouraged unnecessary emotions. His father added, "And we wanted to ensure you didn't confuse romance with business. Business. My marriage, my love, my life with their son. A business transaction." I felt something inside me tremble, not with fear, but with a quiet, simmering hurt. His mother sat back, crossing her legs elegantly. "Sign it today. We'll take it to our attorney in the morning. No question. No conversation. Just expectation." I looked up at them slowly, and in that moment, something froze inside me. They weren't here to protect a legacy. They were here to test me. To see if I valued their son, or the wealth attached to him. To see if I'd bow to their control and their smirks. God, those smirks. Like they already knew I would break. Like they were watching a performance they'd seen 100 times before. The desperate girl agreeing to whatever terms the rich family demanded. I wanted to speak. I wanted to shout. I wanted to defend myself, my love, our future. But no sound came out. I sat there, still as stone, staring at the envelope burning in my lap. 3 days before the wedding. 3 days before forever. And suddenly, I didn't know if the forever I dreamed of was even real. I didn't sign it. I didn't touch it. I didn't even blink. I just sat in stunned silence, my perfect afternoon fractured in an instant, wondering how love could feel so warm while the world around it turned so cold. I didn't open the envelope until they left. I waited until the front door shut and their car rolled away, leaving tire tracks on my driveway like scars on clean skin. My hands were trembling as I broke the seal. I kept telling myself, maybe it's standard. Maybe it's harmless. Maybe it's not as bad as it felt. But then I unfolded the first page. And the second, and the third. By the fourth page, my stomach had twisted into knots so tight I could barely breathe. It wasn't just a prenup. It was a portrait of who they believed I was. Or rather, who they believed someone like me must be. Paragraph after paragraph carved into me like tiny paper cuts. I would have no claim to any family businesses. No stake in anything he built during our marriage. No right to the home we'd be living in unless the deed remained solely under his parents' trust. No access to shared accounts without written permission. And should we divorce, I would receive nothing except whatever personal items I arrived with. There was even a clause saying any children we had would be financially guided and overseen by the family's appointed trustee. Children. My potential children, not mine. Not ours. Theirs. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. Not from weakness, but from the sharpness of the insult. This wasn't protection. This wasn't precaution. This was accusation. They saw me as a threat. A gold digger. A social climber. A girl from a background they judged unworthy of their son's world. My hands curled into fists around the papers. And suddenly, the past made too much sense. Flashbacks hit me like cold wind. Moments I should have noticed. Moments I dismissed. His mother's smile that never reached her eyes when I told her where I grew up. His father's subtle pause before shaking my dad's hand. The way they always referred to people like me as ambitious, but used the word like an insult. The time his mother casually asked if I planned on working after the wedding, or just enjoying the lifestyle. The time his father said during dinner, "Our family has always married." Appropriately, little things. Sharp things. Things I ignored because I loved their son. Their son who was sitting across the room now, staring at the floor like a scolded boy. I didn't even hear him come in. I just sensed him, quiet, hesitant, guilty. He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't know they'd bring it like this. Bring it like this? My voice broke on the words. You knew about the prenup? He flinched. They said it was just a formality. Something simple. Just to keep things clean. Clean? I laughed. Short, disbelieving, painful. They basically called me a leech. He didn't argue. He didn't disagree. He didn't tell me the contract was wrong or unfair. He didn't tear it up or throw it away. He just sat there, passive, silent, torn, but doing nothing. And that hurt more than anything inside the envelope, because I didn't need wealth. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need status or legacy or any of their polished, poisoned expectations. I needed him to stand up. For me, for us, for the love he promised was stronger than his family's money. But he didn't. And the silence between us felt heavier than any signature they wanted from me. My chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in. I stood abruptly, the pages crumpling in my hands. I need air, he called my name softly, almost pleading, but I couldn't look at him. I left the room before he could grab my hand, before he could apologize again without meaning it, before I fell apart in front of someone who wasn't willing to hold me together. The house was dim as I walked down the hallway. My vision was still blurred, my breath still shaky. Every step felt like moving through water, slow, heavy, unreal. That's when my phone buzzed. Once. Just once. I pulled it from my pocket, expecting a message from my bridesmaids or maybe my sister. But this wasn't a contact I knew. It wasn't even a number. It just said, "Blocked caller," and under it, a single message. "You deserve better than this family." I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. Someone was watching. Someone knew. Someone cared, or wanted me to believe they did. As the message glowed in the darkness, one thought drowned out everything else. Who sent it? And why now, 3 days before the wedding? I went back into the living room with the message still burning in my mind. But before I could even process it, he stood up like he'd been waiting for me to return, just to say the one thing I dreaded most. "Please, just sign it," he whispered. Those 4 words felt heavier than anything his parents had thrown at me. I just stared at him. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. "Sign it? After reading what's in there? After the way they spoke to me?" He stepped closer, hesitant, like approaching something fragile. "It's not about you. It's about keeping the peace. They need reassurance. They need to know that I'm not a gold digger," I snapped. "That I'm not trying to steal your family's empire. That someone like me should be grateful to be tolerated." He closed his eyes like he couldn't bear to hear the words out loud, but he didn't deny any of it. And that silence, his silence, was the worst answer he could have given. I felt something inside me bend. Not break, not yet, but bend dangerously close to the point of no return. "I would never do anything to hurt you," I said softly, "but I can't pretend this isn't hurting me." He reached for my hands. I pulled them back. "They're just being cautious," he said. "All wealthy families do this. It's normal." "No," I whispered. "A normal prenup is about protection. This is about humiliation." He rubbed his face, pacing. "Look, we're 3 days away from the wedding. 3 days. I'm trying to avoid a war. My mother's already panicking and my dad is furious you walked out. If you sign it, everything calms down. We can move on. We can be happy." "We?" I repeated. "Or them?" His shoulders tensed. "Why are you making this so difficult?" The words didn't even feel like his. They felt like echoes of the pressure he'd grown up under. Pressure he'd never learned to push back against. Suddenly I wasn't looking at my fiancé. I was looking at the boy who spent his whole life trying not to disappoint the people who never believed anyone else was good enough for him. Not even me. A rush of memories hit me so hard, had to sit down. The job I left when he got transferred across the city. The months I covered the rent alone when his startup failed. The nights I held him after panic attacks, whispering that he wasn't a failure. The weekends I spent helping him rebuild his confidence when his father called him unfocused and not leadership material. The holidays I spent with his family even though they treated me like I was visiting from a different planet. The time his mother asked me, in front of guests, whether I felt overwhelmed by their lifestyle, as if I were some outsider peeking through a window I didn't belong behind. I had given so much. I had cared so deeply. I had loved him in ways he didn't even know how to recognize. And he still wanted me to sign away my dignity just to keep his parents comfortable. "Do you even hear yourself?" I whispered. "You're asking me to agree that I don't deserve anything, not even respect." "I'm asking you to trust me," he insisted. "That's the problem," I said. "Trust goes both ways. You want me to trust you while your parents don't trust me at all." He walked toward me again, and this time I didn't move. I just sat there, quietly unraveling. "I love you," he said. "But this is the only way. The only way." The words sliced deeper than any line in the prenup. Because suddenly, painfully, I realized something I had been avoiding all along. Maybe I wasn't marrying just him. Maybe I was marrying his fear of disappointing them, his family's money, their judgment, their rules, their conditions, their approval he would always chase and never earn, and me, the woman who loved him more fiercely than his parents ever could, was being asked to shrink myself to fit into their expectations. My throat tightened. If peace means losing myself, I don't know if I can afford the cost. His expression shifted, hurt, confused, frustrated, but he didn't say anything. And that silence became the loudest truth between us. Because for the first time, I wondered if walking down that aisle would mean walking straight into a life of being quietly, politely broken. I drove to my mother's old apartment because I needed a place untouched by his family's shadows, a place where I could breathe without hearing the word prenup in my mind. The building hadn't changed much, still worn around the edges, still smelling faintly of paint and jasmine from the neighbor who never stopped cleaning. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step carrying me farther from the life I thought I was entering and closer to the one I used to know. When I opened the door, the air felt still, almost preserved. My mother had passed years ago, but I kept the apartment for reasons I never explained to anyone. It was my quiet sanctuary, a room-sized memory. I walked through the living room, trailing my fingers over the furniture she once touched, the frames she arranged. I felt her presence more clearly than I had in months. Maybe that's why I noticed the box. It was tucked under the coffee table, half hidden beneath a stack of books. A plain cardboard box, sealed with tape that had yellowed over time. My name was written on top in my mother's handwriting, gentle, looping letters that made my breath catch. I knelt down and picked it up. For a moment, I couldn't open it. I just held it like it might crumble. Finally, with trembling fingers, I lifted the tape and unfolded the flaps. Inside, there were papers. Lots of them, neatly bound, labeled, organized in the way my mother handled everything. On top rested an envelope addressed to me. The date made my heart lurch, written nearly a decade earlier. I slid the letter out and unfolded it. Her words hit me softly at first, then all at once. She wrote about a small tech startup she had joined with a friend years ago. Something she believed in, something she worked on quietly while raising me. She never talked about it much, always shrugging it off as old work. But the letter explained what she never said. She had held shares. And before she got sick, the company had been acquired. Bought for millions, her share had been placed in a trust. For me. Untouched, waiting, and I had never known. Tears blurred the page. I shook my head, whispering, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Maybe she wanted me to live without expectation. Maybe she wanted me to build myself before wealth could shape my choices. Or maybe she never thought the day would come when I'd need this piece of her strength. In the stack beneath the letter, I found legal documents, ownership statements, trust confirmations, financial breakdowns. Her signature was on everything, and at the bottom was a note from an attorney. My pulse quickened. I dialed the number listed beside his name. He answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, professional, warm enough to ease the tension in my shoulders. I introduced myself and explained what I had found. There was a pause. Then he asked me to come in. The information was important. An hour later, I sat across from him in a quiet office filled with law books and soft lamplight. He reviewed the documents, nodding to himself. When he finally looked up, his expression was almost proud. "Your mother planned well," he said. "Your inheritance has grown substantially. With compounding market gains and acquisitions since, you're not just comfortable, you're well off." The word wealthy felt strange, like wearing clothes tailored for someone else. I thought of his parents' sneers, the prenup, the way they assumed I was clawing into their fortune. A slow, steady fire lit inside me. He leaned back, folding his hands. "I understand you're preparing for a marriage?" I let out a small laugh. Something like that. He studied me for a moment, then spoke with a certainty that made my skin prickle. They don't know who they're underestimating. His words hung in the air, like the first crack of a storm, powerful and promising. It settled into me slowly, like warmth after a long winter, reminding me that I wasn't as small as they made me feel. For the first time in days, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt strength. When I returned to the house, the sky had shifted into that strange late evening blue, the kind that makes everything look colder than it is. I walked in quietly, not ready yet to see him, not ready to think about the wedding or the prenup or any of the things that had clawed at my chest over the past day. I just wanted to grab some clothes and breathe. But as I stepped toward the hallway, voices drifted from the living room. I froze. His mother's tone was unmistakable, sharp, dripping with entitlement. "Honestly, I don't know what our son was thinking. She's practically charity. We've carried her more than she's carried herself." His father laughed, low and mean. "From the gutter to our family? She should be grateful we're even giving her a chance. And she's acting offended about a prenup? Please, she should be thankful we didn't make it harsher. My hand tightened around the strap of my bag until my knuckles whitened. Their words slid into me like needles, small, sharp, deliberate. And then came the one that changed everything. She's a liability, his mother said. Emotionally unstable, financially useless. And she's so desperate to marry him, she'll sign anything. Watch. A soft chuckle. She'll fold. Girls like her always do. Girls like her. I stood there, cloaked by the shadows of the hallway, listening to the two people who pretended to welcome me into their family casually carve me apart with their tongues. At another time, on another day, those words might have shattered me. 3 days before, they might have broken something I wasn't sure I could fix. But not now. Not after discovering what my mother left me. Not after realizing how small they needed me to be in order to feel big. Something shifted inside me. Quiet, clean, razor-sharp clarity. Heartbreak fell away like old skin. What replaced it wasn't rage, not exactly. It was understanding. Freedom. A strange calm that settled over me like a second heartbeat. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was begging for their approval, their crumbs, their acceptance. They thought they were the gatekeepers to a better life. I exhaled slowly and stepped forward, letting my heels click on the floor loud enough to announce my presence. The talking stopped instantly. His mother turned first, her expression stretching into a tight smile, the kind that wanted to look warm, but couldn't hide the contempt beneath it. "Oh," she said lightly. "You're back." His father straightened, clearing his throat. Neither apologized. Neither looked ashamed. They just adjusted their masks like seasoned performers and waited for me to fall back into the role they had written for me. And so I did. For now. I forced a small laugh, pretending I hadn't heard a single word. "Yeah," I said softly. "Just needed some air. I'm still thinking about everything." His mother's eyes gleamed with triumph. She thought I was bending, cracking, folding, exactly as she predicted. "Good." His father nodded, smugness already returning to his posture. "It's not easy, I'm sure. But if you truly love our son, you'll understand why this agreement is necessary." I smiled, small, obedient, perfectly pathetic. The kind of smile that made them feel powerful. Inside, though, something was stirring. A plan, a direction, a quiet thunder building behind my ribs. "I understand," I whispered. "I just need time." His mother reached forward, patting my arm as though comforting a child. The contact made my skin crawl. "Take all the time you need. We want what's best for the family, for our reputation. And of course," she added sweetly, "for you." What a lie. I nodded like I believed her, like I still feared disappointing them. But as their attention drifted away, their victory assumed, I felt a steady pulse of resolve drum against my chest. I didn't need their acceptance. I didn't need their money, their approval, their arrogance draped in designer clothing. I wasn't marrying into wealth anymore. I was walking into a battlefield with more power than they could imagine. And I wasn't afraid. As I walked past them, their satisfied smirks behind me, I felt the last remnants of my old desperation crumble. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel trapped. I felt awake. They thought they knew me. They thought the girl standing before them was still the same one they mocked behind closed doors, but they had no idea who I truly was. Not yet. The next morning felt unnaturally quiet, like the world was holding its breath for whatever I was about to walk into. The prenup meeting had been scheduled by his mother with all the grace of someone arranging a dental extraction. Necessary, unpleasant, and entirely my burden. I arrived at their home exactly on time, not early enough to look eager, not late enough to appear defiant, just present, just calm. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with expectation. His parents sat at the long dining table like royalty presiding over a court hearing, the slim folder placed neatly in the center. My fiancé sat beside them, shoulders pulled tight, eyes darting between us like he wished the entire moment would dissolve. He gave me a small, hopeful smile, the kind meant to reassure but only reminded me how weak he had been through all of this. His mother gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit," she said, in a tone that didn't sound like a request. I sat. She pushed the folder toward me with a manicured hand, then placed a silver pen on top, sliding it across the polished surface as though offering scraps to someone below her at the table. "We've made everything very clear," she said. "All you need to do is sign." I opened the folder slowly. It felt almost surreal, flipping through the pages I had already read once, pages that had insulted me so deeply just days before. But now they no longer made my stomach twist. Instead, they fueled me. Each demeaning clause, each controlling line, each assumption that I was weak or desperate. His father leaned back, watching me with mild amusement. "We appreciate your cooperation," he said. "It'll keep everything smooth." I didn't look up. "Oh, I'm sure it will." Their smirks twitched, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I flipped through the document page by page, skimming, lingering, humming softly as I read, pretending, calculating. Their amused expressions slowly shifted into impatience. His mother tapped the table. "There's no need to overthink it. The terms are standard. Standard for whom?" I asked lightly, her jaw tightened. "Families like ours." I nodded, pretending to absorb that. "Of course. And you're sure everything here is exactly as you want it?" Her eyes flashed with victory. "Exactly. Perfect." I turned to the final page, the signature line waiting like a dare. But before signing, I pulled a single sheet of paper from my bag and placed it neatly beside the contract. They all stared at it. My fiancé frowned. "What's that?" "Just something small," I said. "A clause protecting my future earnings. Anything I earn independently, creative work, investments, consulting, remains solely mine. Since your parents are so concerned about protecting their legacy, I assume they'll respect my right to protect my own." His mother's face sharpened. "That wasn't part of the agreement." I smiled gently. "I know, which is why I'm adding it." His father scoffed. "You don't have significant earnings." The old me might have flinched. The new me didn't even blink. "That's why it should be easy for you to agree, then." His mother waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, if that's what it takes to get this done." I slid the clause into the prenup. "Wonderful." I watched them relax, confident in their win. They truly believed I was just tidying up a loose end. They truly believed their wealth was a sun around which I was destined to orbit. I lifted the pen, signed my name with a calm hand. My fiancé let out a relieved exhale, like he'd been holding his breath the entire morning. His mother took the contract quickly, flipping through to ensure my signature was where it needed to be. "Good girl," she murmured. That was the moment I felt something inside me harden, not in pain, but in certainty. They would never see me as anything more than a convenient accessory, and yet they had no idea how little power they truly had over me anymore. When the documents were collected and boxed, when the pen was tucked away and the meeting formally ended, they all stood with the satisfied air of victors. I stood too, steady, polite, unbothered. His mother reached for my arm as I turned to leave. "Now everything will go smoothly," she said. I smiled, but there was steel beneath it. "Oh yes," I said softly. "Tomorrow will be very smooth." She didn't catch the meaning, but I did, because tomorrow I would be meeting with my mother's lawyer, and nothing about their smirks would matter anymore. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, a calm contrast to the chaos I had left behind at home. I sat across from him, my hands folded, trying to steady the rapid thump of my heartbeat. I had brought all the documents my mother had left behind, plus the new clause I had added to the prenup, and now I was here for clarity, for confirmation, for the kind of information that could finally make the scales tip in my favor. He smiled at me, professional but warm. "You're about to see why your mother's foresight was remarkable," he said, sliding the first folder toward me. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. Stocks, shares, trust accounts, and acquisition contracts, a web of legal and financial threads that all led to one undeniable conclusion. My mother had left me a stake in her old startup, yes, but over the years, through dividends, stock appreciation, and reinvestments, my portion had ballooned into something enormous. "Your stake," the lawyer said, tapping a line in a spreadsheet. is currently valued higher than the combined assets of your fiancé's family business. On paper, you're wealthier than they ever realized. I blinked, disbelieving. The numbers swam in my mind like constellations, revealing a pattern I had never noticed before. Wealth, security, independence, power. All waiting for me. Silently, quietly, as though my mother had known exactly when I would need it. And there's more, he continued, lowering his voice slightly. I've reviewed some public filings for your fiancé's parents. They're not as secure as they appear. In fact, they're relying heavily on maintaining a polished public image to secure investors and favorable deals. Their financial position is less stable than the world thinks. I swallowed hard. That smug, polished confidence I'd felt crushed under just days ago. Their smirks, their carefully curated aura of untouchable wealth, was suddenly exposed as a facade. The prenup, the dismissive treatment, the constant need to assert superiority. It wasn't about protecting their fortune. It was about controlling mine. They needed to make sure, he explained, that you wouldn't have access to this wealth, even unknowingly. You weren't a threat to their money. They wanted to prevent you from ever claiming the one thing that could shift the balance of power entirely. I leaned back in the chair, letting the words sink in. A slow, delicious warmth spread through me. Not pride, not arrogance exactly, but the clarity of control finally within my reach. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't desperate. And I certainly wasn't the girl they had mocked, the one they assumed would bend, break, and beg for approval. Everything clicked. The smug comments, the sneers, the prenup pushed in my lap like an order rather than a legal necessity. Every slight, every whispered insult, every glance that suggested I was insignificant suddenly took on a new meaning. They were afraid, not of me as a person, but of me as a financial force they had underestimated. I could see it now. The way they had tried to make me appear small, dependent, meek. It wasn't about them protecting what they had. It was about them keeping me unaware of what I already possessed. And in trying to control me, they had exposed themselves. The lawyer pushed a summary sheet across the desk. Technically, everything is legally sound. You have more leverage than you can imagine. If you choose to act, you can ensure your future is entirely in your hands. And they won't see it coming until it's too late. I stared at the numbers again, feeling the weight of possibility settle over me. The scales had shifted dramatically. I had been given a second chance at power, a new vantage point from which to navigate the people who had underestimated me for years. A slow smile spread across my face, the kind that begins in the eyes and curves quietly, subtly, into the corners of the mouth. Calm, deliberate, full of intent. For the first time, I felt untouchable, not arrogant, not boastful, but fully awake to the reality that the girl they had mocked, the girl they assumed would fold, had the tools to dictate her own story. Tomorrow, the world would see a woman they believed weak, wielding a power they never imagined she had, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The evening of the rehearsal dinner was electric, a mixture of celebration and tension that seemed to hum beneath every crystal chandelier. I arrived wearing the dress I had chosen weeks ago, the one that made me feel poised, confident, and radiant. The restaurant was buzzing with family, friends, and colleagues, the kind of crowd that always left me feeling both observed and invisible at the same time. I took a deep breath, telling myself tonight I would stay composed. Whatever happened, I wouldn't let anyone see me falter. It didn't take long for them to begin. His mother, with that perfectly polished smile that barely hid disdain, leaned toward a cousin and whispered loud enough for me to hear. You know, she's really come a long way, considering where she started. Lucky she signed where she belonged. His father chuckled, lifting his glass as if the comment were a toast to their own superiority. Yes, and let's not forget, her background. Well, it's fortunate she's marrying into our standards. Whispers rippled through the room. Guests exchanged glances, unsure where to look, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch the spectacle unfold. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation creeping up my spine, the kind that had threatened to crush me just days ago. But this time something had shifted. I didn't shrink. I didn't flinch. I let the words wash over me, acknowledging their cruelty, but letting them fuel a quiet internal fire. I felt every judgment, every sneer, every tiny jab, and I stored it away, not as pain, but as power. When his mother's gaze finally found me, smug and triumphant, I stood, smoothly, calmly, as if I were stepping onto a stage designed only for my performance. The murmuring in the room grew louder, curious and uncertain. "I just wanted to say thank you," I began, my voice measured, almost casual. "Thank you for reminding me why I've always fought for my own future, my own independence, and my own respect." Heads turned. His parents stiffened. My fiancé's eyes widened in confusion, darting between me and his family. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, and I continued, letting my words sink in slowly. "Tomorrow, I have a very important meeting with the CEO of the company that purchased my mother's startup. I'll be reviewing the current financials and discussing my future role." Gasps rippled across the table. Some whispered to one another, their curiosity piqued. Others stared openly, wide-eyed. His parents froze, expressions draining of the smug superiority they had wielded all evening. His mother's hand twitched near her wineglass. His father's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing at his temple. My fiancé's face mirrored a mix of confusion, fear, and disbelief. He didn't understand yet what I had uncovered, what power I now held, and how the very people he had trusted to preserve his family's image were suddenly exposed as vulnerable. I allowed myself a small, polite smile, letting the room settle into an uncomfortable hush. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every glance at me that had once conveyed judgment now carried uncertainty. They were recalculating, realizing that the girl they assumed would bend had become someone they couldn't predict. And in that silence, I felt a thrill of control. Not over them, not yet fully, but over the narrative. For the first time in years, I wasn't at the mercy of anyone's approval. I took my seat slowly, letting the energy of the room and the shock of my announcement linger. My fiancé still looked frozen, unsure how to respond, while his parents sat rigid, their smiles gone, their posture rigid, their confidence suddenly fragile. For the first time, the rehearsal dinner wasn't a stage for embarrassment. It was a stage for observation, and I was no longer the subject. I was the one writing the script. The office was quiet, almost deceptively serene, as I sat across from the CEO. The city outside glimmered with evening lights, but inside, the air felt charged, heavy with possibilities. I had come expecting confirmation of my inheritance, and while that had already shifted my perspective, what I was about to hear completely reframed the battlefield. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You realize," he began carefully, "that your shares now give you significant voting power. Not just financial value, voting power. You could influence decisions, corporate direction, even partnerships." I blinked. My mind raced. The implications unfolded like dominoes toppling all at once. Every sneer, every insult, every attempt to control me, it wasn't just ignorance. It was fear, a fear I had never anticipated, because they didn't know the real weight of what they were trying to manipulate. "They've always assumed," he continued, "that someone in your position would remain passive. They don't know what leverage looks like when it's in your hands. They think power is inherited through tradition and control. But now, you hold the cards." I leaned forward, my fingers tapping lightly on the polished mahogany desk. A slow smile spread across my face, quiet at first, then widening with a sense of inevitability. This wasn't just a personal victory. This was a strategic one. Every threat they had made, every sneer at my background, every clause shoved into that prenup, they had tried to contain me. And now, unknowingly, they had handed me a tool far stronger than any threat they could levy. I thought back to that black envelope, tossed into my lap with smirks so confident they made me ache with humiliation. They had believed it would crush me, that it would bend me into the shape they deemed acceptable. They had assumed I was desperate, naive, powerless. But here I was, calm, collected, in possession of leverage that could shift the balance entirely. And what if I wanted to act on this influence? I asked the CEO, letting the words hang between us, testing the gravity of what he was revealing. He smiled knowingly, as if he had anticipated the question all along. Then you'd be in a position to make decisions that could directly impact their business dealings. Not immediately disastrous, but influential enough to demand their attention. They would realize very quickly that they misjudged you. The thought made my pulse quicken. The thrill wasn't in revenge alone. It was in the realization that I had agency, that I could finally dictate terms. Every moment of humiliation they had engineered now seemed almost laughable in contrast to the power I had quietly accumulated. I closed my eyes briefly, picturing the scene. The smug expressions at the rehearsal dinner, their whispers, the way they had tried to position me as a charity case, a liability, someone beneath them. And now, unknowingly, they had set the stage for their own reckoning. A deep clarity settled in me. I could feel it in my chest, steady and deliberate. The thrill of control tempered by patience. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to confront them recklessly. I only needed to understand the reach of my influence and act when the moment demanded it. They threw a prenup at me, I thought, as if it would define me, limit me. They never imagined I could hand them something bigger, and I would. Carefully, strategically, elegantly. The CEO leaned forward slightly, a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Your mother always knew how to prepare you. She left you more than just wealth. She left you leverage. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of his words settle. My hands rested on the documents before me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt fully untouchable. Not arrogant, not boastful, but awake, powerful, and entirely in control of what would come next. Tomorrow the battlefield would shift, and this time, I would decide the terms. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the venue, gilding the marble floors and casting long, golden streaks across the polished walls. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and stepped into the grand hall. Every eye seemed to fall on me, not out of judgment, but curiosity. There was something different about my stride, the way my dress caught the light, the quiet certainty radiating from my posture. I was no longer tentative, no longer trembling under the weight of expectations. Today, I carried more than a gown. I carried the clarity and power I had discovered over the past few days. His parents were already there, hovering near the front, exchanging whispers and sharp glances. The familiar coldness radiated off them in waves, as if they expected me to shrink, to mutter apologies, to be the fragile, powerless girl they had tried to mold. His mother's lips curled into that practiced, patronizing smile. "Ah, finally, you look adequate," she said lightly, as though testing whether I would rise to anger. "I hope you're ready to remember your place today." His father nodded in agreement, tapping a finger against his palm with quiet impatience. "Yes, this is a moment for our family. Let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be." I smiled, polite and serene, letting them bask in the illusion of their dominance. For now, I played the part they expected, calm, compliant, even slightly deferential. But in my hands, I carried a secret that would turn the entire room on its head. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim, professional folder. The polished leather felt cool against my fingertips. Their eyes flicked to it instantly, curiosity piqued. "I thought it might be helpful," I said softly, voice carrying just enough for them to hear, "to review some details before the ceremony begins." His mother's brow lifted, a subtle twitch of irritation. "Details? Of what, exactly?" I handed the folder to her carefully, letting my smile remain perfectly neutral. "Just some financial statements," I said, "about my holdings. Thought it might clarify the prenup discussions, in case there was any confusion about what I now bring to the table." Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder. The father leaned over, peering at the sheets I had included. Stock valuations, trust statements, and detailed summaries of my inherited shares. Each number painted a picture they had refused to acknowledge before. The smile they had worn so confidently faded, replaced by something sharper, shock, disbelief, and the first traces of fear. I let them absorb it, slowly, deliberately. The room felt heavier with each passing second, as if the walls themselves recognized the shift in power. I added softly, almost as an afterthought, "Just so you know what you were protecting your son from." The color drained from my mother-in-law's face, her perfectly applied makeup failing to mask the sudden panic rising in her expression. Her hands shook slightly, faltering on the papers. She opened her mouth, searching for words. But nothing came out. His father's eyes widened in horror, and I could see the calculation happening in real time. The family empire they had relied on for image, control and status was suddenly vulnerable to the woman they had dismissed as a liability. His jaw clenched. His fingers gripped the folder too tightly, and the tension in his shoulders was undeniable. Around them, the guests began to murmur, sensing that something monumental had just occurred. Whispers traveled like wildfire, the realization of the family dynamic unraveling in real time. This wasn't just a private victory, it was a public one. I held their gaze for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch and build the weight of the moment. Then I turned, walking toward the entrance where the ceremony would begin, letting the shift settle around them like a storm they hadn't anticipated. They had underestimated me for years. And this morning, in front of everyone, they saw the consequences of that mistake. The music swelled softly as I stepped toward the altar, the polished floor reflecting the chandeliers above. The guests' faces blurred into a haze of expectation. I felt every eye on me, every whisper, every flicker of anticipation. But I didn't falter. I carried the calm I had cultivated over the past days, the clarity of my mother's foresight, and the unshakable knowledge that I was no longer powerless. He stood there, my fiancé in a suit that had suddenly seemed smaller than the weight of the moment. I looked at him, searching his eyes for the man I had loved, the one I thought would defend me. Instead, I saw hesitation, a shadow of fear that hadn't been there before, the same fear that had allowed his parents to dominate him, to dictate our path, to make me feel small. When the officiant asked the question, "Do you take him to be your lawfully wedded husband?" I swallowed hard. My voice didn't shake. My heart didn't falter. I could see the panic beginning to ripple through him as he whispered, almost inaudible, "Did you do all this just to scare them?" I looked at him then, really looked. The man I had supported through every low, every struggle, every sacrifice, jobs left, rent covered, late-night consolations, was here, standing silent while I had been humiliated. And I realized, painfully but clearly, that he had been molded by the fear of his parents more than by love or loyalty. I breathed deeply and let the words flow, not just to him but to myself. No, I did this to remember who I am. The room tilted slightly in my mind, the collective holding of breath among the guests, the tension thickening, yet I felt no tremor of doubt. I had spent years bending, shrinking, accommodating, hoping for acceptance that had never been mine to seek. And now, standing in the brightest room of my life, I could finally step into my own power. I turned fully toward the officiant, my posture steady, my gaze unwavering. I'm not marrying someone who stood silent while I was humiliated. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling in stillness. Gasps echoed across the room. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father's expression froze, color draining from his face. Guests leaned forward, murmuring, shocked into silence by the audacity, by the clarity, by the simple truth I had spoken. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to reason, perhaps to beg, but I shook my head ever so slightly. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about me, reclaiming the dignity that had been stolen, stepping out of the shadow of their control, and reminding everyone, including myself, that I had always been enough. I walked away from the altar slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking against the polished floor like a drumbeat of resolve. Every eye followed me, some in awe, some in disbelief, some in barely concealed admiration. I could feel their shock, their recalibration, their inability to process the transformation that had taken place in front of them. Outside, the sunlight felt warmer than it had all morning. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with air that tasted like freedom. Every step I took was measured, calm, deliberate, a physical echo of the power I had cultivated. I had not only reclaimed my wealth, my voice, and my agency, I had made it undeniable, tangible, in a way that no one could ignore or diminish. And as I left the room, leaving a stunned crowd and a fiancé frozen in hesitation, I felt it fully, the relief, the triumph, the clarity. I had walked through humiliation, through manipulation, through betrayal, and I had emerged unbroken, untouchable, and fully myself. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. The wedding that was supposed to be a celebration of union had instead become the talk of the city. Whispers of the groom's family's cruelty and the bride's bold defiance circulating through social media, gossip columns, and even casual water cooler chatter. People were fascinated by the audacity, by the clarity, by the girl who had walked away from a marriage and a life that demanded she shrink herself to fit someone else's expectations. The first ripple came from investors. Calls that once carried warmth and agreement now ended abruptly. Emails went unanswered and meetings were canceled without explanation. It didn't take long to realize why. The parents' carefully curated image of perfection had cracked, revealing the arrogance, cruelty, and pettiness they had so carefully hidden. Their reputation, built on the pretense of stability and propriety, began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. Every business partner who had once depended on their perceived influence now questioned their judgment, their ethics, and their leadership. Meanwhile, I felt a quiet sense of liberation that no gossip, no public scrutiny, and no dramatic fallout could touch. I woke each morning not to obligations imposed by others, not to the need for validation or approval, but to the freedom of knowing exactly who I was and the life I was choosing to lead. The wealth my mother had secured for me, once an abstract, almost mythical idea, was now tangible. It wasn't just money. It was independence, security, and a clean slate. I purchased a small home, modest by some standards but infused with personal significance. It was in my mother's name, a tribute to the woman who had worked quietly and wisely to ensure that I would never again be powerless. Every corner, every wall, every room carried her influence, her foresight, her love. I moved in slowly, unpacking only the things that mattered: memories, lessons, and the faint scent of jasmine from her old apartment. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under someone else's expectations. I wasn't bending to fit into their hierarchy or their judgments. I wasn't shrinking myself to accommodate someone else's image of success. I was my own architect, building a life from the foundation my mother had laid, adding layers of experience, resilience, and vision. Friends and distant family reached out, curious or inspired by the story. Some offered support, some advice, some simply admiration. I accepted only what aligned with my path, leaving behind those whose intentions carried even the faintest trace of manipulation or judgment. I was no longer available to the whims of people who measured value in wealth, status, or superficial appearances. As I walked through my new home, I paused by the window, looking out over the quiet street bathed in late afternoon sunlight. For a long moment, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened: the betrayal, the humiliation, the awakenings, and the victories. It had been a storm, yes, but every gust of wind, every crack of lightning had shaped me, strengthened me, and brought me here. And while the fallout for his parents would continue, lost deals, shaken reputations, whispers of scandal, I felt none of the satisfaction of vengeance. Instead, I felt peace. Peace that came from standing firmly in my own worth, from knowing that my life was mine to command, and from realizing that independence and dignity were more valuable than any approval they could have granted. I closed the front door gently behind me, inhaling the quiet, the freedom, the calm. My mother had given me more than wealth. She had given me a life I could never be forced to apologize for, a foundation to rise on, and a reminder that the strongest victories were the ones earned quietly, wisely, and without compromise. Months had passed since the wedding debacle, since the confrontation, since the realization that I no longer belonged to anyone but myself. My life had settled into a rhythm I had never known before, quiet, purposeful, and entirely my own. The home I had bought in my mother's name felt lived in, infused with the sense of security and dignity I had long craved. I moved through it with intention, each day a testament to the freedom I had carved out for myself. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. When I did, it was him, my ex-fiancé. The voice I once trusted, now tentative and apologetic, filled the line. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for not standing up for you, for letting them humiliate you, for everything I should have done differently. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend. I let him speak, and as he rattled off his regrets, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't the moment for anger, or for vindication, or for tears. It was merely a moment of acknowledgement, a quiet confirmation that I had made the right choice before the vows were even exchanged. When he paused, awaiting some response, I took a measured breath. "Thank you," I said softly, and he blinked, startled by the simplicity of my words. Not for the pain, not for the humiliation, but for showing me the truth before it became permanent. "You didn't defend me, but at least now I know exactly where I stand. And that clarity, that saved me." There was a long pause on the line. He swallowed audibly, his voice tight. I never meant for it to go this far." "I know," I said, letting the truth hang in the air between us. "And yet it did, and that's exactly why I'm grateful." After a final word, I hung up, feeling a lightness I hadn't known I could feel. No lingering bitterness, no need for justification, no requirement for acknowledgement beyond this quiet closure. I had won, not through public spectacle, not through confrontation, but through the careful, deliberate reclaiming of my own life. I sat by the window, looking out at the trees swaying gently in the breeze, reflecting on everything that had led me here. Some betrayals, I realized, save you. They strip away illusions, expose the truths you might never have faced otherwise. They force you to confront the people, and even yourself, with clarity you didn't realize you needed. Humiliation, as painful as it is in the moment, can sometimes be a catalyst. A harsh mirror held up by those who underestimated you, forcing you to see your own strength and resilience. And the very prenup they smacked into my lap, the document meant to limit me, had become a symbol of the power I had quietly accumulated, a reminder that underestimation is the most dangerous weapon an enemy ever wields. I leaned back, letting my reflection mingle with the soft afternoon light. I had been tested, exposed, and challenged in ways that could have broken me. But instead, I had emerged not just intact, but elevated, financially, emotionally, and morally. The quiet victory wasn't flashy. There were no headlines for me, no applause from the world. It was subtler, deeper, and infinitely more satisfying. I had stepped away from humiliation, reclaimed my worth, and proved to myself, above all, that some of life's harshest blows are also the ones that set you free. And as I closed my eyes, I smiled, knowing that the girl who had once been underestimated had risen far higher than anyone had imagined, higher than even I had dared to hope.